We're excited to be here today. So tonight we have the candidates for Vice President of Financial Affairs. So the format of this debate is going to be each candidate gets 1 minute for opening statements, and then each candidate, 1 minute each, sorry to clarify that, just to make sure, and then each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to our questions with opportunities for them to respond to each other as well. So to start us off, we'll go to Abby Tamayo. So Abby, your opening statements.
Hello, everybody. I'd just like to thank everyone that is here right now, and I'd like to thank the Daily Aztec for being able to adapt to an online platform. My name is Abby Tamayo, and I'm running to be your next Vice President of Financial Affairs. I've been in AS for about 3 years now, supporting students and amplifying student voices through my positions. I have extensive knowledge and experience in fundraising to support my communities and to be able to fight food insecurities on campus and in the San Diego community. I'm well versed, and I have been a student advocate through my roles as Director of Fundraising for Tijuana Home Build, been an ECRT advocate, a previous Student Support Commissioner, and I am confident that in this position, I can empower students from all backgrounds to be successful at SDSU. I believe that finance is not just about numbers, but that the stories of students should be added to the equation, and I would be honored to be your VP of Finance. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Austin?
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Austin Barber, and I'm running to be your Vice President of Financial Affairs. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the Daily Aztec for testing out these uncharted waters and giving us a virtual platform to speak on today. I'd also like to thank the students here right now, willing to hear about their future for associated students. Thirdly, I'd like to thank my opponent, Abigail Tamayo, for being here right now. As your Chief Financial Officer, I know I have the proper experience, knowledge, and passion to properly lead associated students' both finances and philanthropic efforts moving forward. I want to intentionally support student needs and serve this through my servant-oriented mindset. I have cultivated this service-oriented mindset through my experiences on campus, such as being on the Financial Affairs Committee, being an associate student, being a peer leadership consultant, as well as being a member of the service-oriented club, Rotaract. I want to serve you now, SDSU. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. So we'll go ahead and jump right into our first question. At this time last year, we were conducting these debates in person at an empty student union theater, which is kind of weird to think about. But for the past 12 months, students have been tuning into classes online, and their connection to campus is almost entirely virtual. Why is it important that students tune in and participate in the Associated Students elections, especially this year? We'll start with Austin.
Yes, I think it's important that students tune into these Associated Students elections and have their voice heard, because at the end of the day, Associated Students is a $30 million nonprofit organization. And these executive officers are what's going to uplift students' voices for years to come. I know that students are struggling right now. I have seen the economic crisis response team's responses peak this year, where students face economic struggles as well as trauma. Therefore, I think that this executive position and why students should get involved in voting is because the executive positions go past representation and move into advocacy. They need students that are up there ready to have their voices heard and express to administration that things need to change now. And I think I can do that as your Vice President of Financial Affairs.
Awesome, thank you, Austin. Abby?
Yes, thank you for that question. Sitting on Campus Fee Advisory Committee, I have seen the university try to raise fees, propose new fees, and I know that that can very much hinder the progress of low-income students and students of color. I believe that it's very important to get involved with AS because these are people that are these are students that are going to represent you and that are going to make decisions on your behalf. And these decisions really impact you financially or just like for your campus life. So just having students be able to be involved with AS is really important because like Austin said, we do have a really big budget and we work very closely with the university. So just having students be represented and being able to know that they are considered by the right people. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. The campus is currently undergoing a massive expansion into Mission Valley, where a satellite campus is being developed. How do you plan to gauge student opinions on this issue and ensure that the final product addresses the needs for students first? Abby, we'll start with you this time.
Thank you for that question. As the SUSU Mission Valley campus is being under construction, I want to make sure that no students on the SUSU campus or in the Imperial Valley campus is having any sort of fees increases to go towards the Mission Valley campus. And I want to be able to make sure that our infrastructure here on campus and our needs on the San Diego State campus is continued to being heard. As well as conducting surveys in order to get the other students' opinions on how they feel about the Mission Valley campus and what they need at their home campus as well.
Austin?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. The campus is currently undergoing a massive expansion into Mission Valley, where a satellite campus is being developed. How do you plan to gauge student opinions on this issue and ensure that the final product addresses the needs of students first?
Of course. As my opponent stated, I believe that it is really important to not only gauge students' voices here, but also at our other satellite campus, Imperial Valley. As we move into this tight schedule moving forward, we want to make sure that the university doesn't impress other fees on us to expedite that process, because students are struggling right now. And I think it is important to note that although this expansion is going to be great for the greater San Diego area and help improve San Diego State as well, it's important that students are not put in any awkward situations or any unacceptable situations to do this.
Awesome. Thank you guys. We'll move on to the next, or Abby, do you have a response? Sorry.
No.
Okay, awesome. So we'll move on to the next question. So one of the largest issues that SUSU students face is housing affordability. So how would you ensure that the future of housing plans on campus have students' best interest in mind when that comes down to price and safety? So we'll start with Abby.
Yes, thank you for that question. I'm well aware that I am a commuter student and I live at home in order to save money because there's over 50% of students who are commuter students, and living at home is a way to save money. However, those students who are low income, although they do get the Pell Grant to be able to help with their housing and boarding fees, it is still not enough. So having that financial fundings to help with students having more scholarships through associated students and putting the unallocated funds available for the students, as well as using the ECRT, providing and making sure that students are well knowledgeable of, the grocery assistance program that we have, CalFresh, all of that good stuff that will be able to alleviate any sort of financial hardships on students that are trying to afford housing and the boarding fees on campus, as well as advocating for these students, being well aware that we are in a pandemic and that it's very costly to live on campus. And with the possibility of a hybrid model, being able to take classes online is a lot cheaper than, being in campus.
Awesome. Thank you, Austin.
Yes, I'd like to recognize that campus vibrancy is not where it once was. Students are lacking the community and sense of feel that they normally get when living on campus. Therefore, with that being said, I want to work with Carabowers to make sure that housing is affordable and recognize that maybe we should not be paying as much as we are when the environment on campus is not the same. I think this is very important to recognize because a lot of people come to SDSU because of this campus vibrancy, because of the experiences, because they get to see a March Madness ready team, basketball team playing in person. And therefore, I think it's really important to make sure that students are being advocated for, and that not only right now, but in the future, students are not having to have any increases in campus fees or in campus paying for campus housing.
Abby, do you have a response?
No.
Okay, cool.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. For most SDSU students, getting a degree will put them deeply into debt. Many young people who dream of attending SDSU never will because of affordability issues. How would you guys advocate on behalf of young people for making college more affordable and more accessible? Austin, we can start with you this time.
Yes, I think this really starts with a multifaceted approach. A campus affordability and going to college, it is expensive. And so therefore, I think it is really emphasizing all the great things that SDSU has put into place to help make campus more affordable. Aztec scholarships just rolled out, and I think it's important to highlight that thing as we've moved to a new website and made it easier to get scholarships. I also think it's important to work with economic crisis response team and continue that relationship that the previous vice presidents of financial affairs have established to make sure that students know that there are resources accessible to help them pay for what they have to pay for college. I also think that it is important to make sure to advocate for students. Make sure that all other means are exhausted before we take on another campus fee, before we get a tuition hike. Our campus has gotten the most money ever with CARES and HERF funding this year. And so there is no reason why we should have to pay more to go to San Diego State. And that is why we should keep pushing these accessible resources to make sure that students don't feel financially burdened being a part of San Diego State.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Definitely. For most SDSU students, getting a degree will deeply into debt. Many young people who dream of SDSU never will because of affordability issues. How would you advocate on behalf of young people for making college more affordable and more accessible?
I believe that advocating for students should start with the decreasing student fees that we are currently facing with right now. The Campus Fee Advisory Committee has already have increasing fees that are being proposed, and that will cause financial hardships, as well as, being a low income student and even being a middle class student, you are going to get into debt and it's going to be very hard. But knowing that SDSU has so many other resources, such as the Economic Crisis Response Team with their financial aids, I have heard stories of students being able to continue their studies because of these aids. As well as Austin said, the Aztec scholarship has just rolled out, so making sure that students are knowledgeable, that they can apply and that they are eligible for these resources. And just really getting the word out that Associated Students has unallocated funds that we could really help support students, especially low-income students, because we truly do care about our diverse community, and we want to make sure that graduation rates and dropping out rates do not increase, and that the price to get a degree does not increase either. Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
Absolutely.
I completely agree. We should not be increasing any fees on campus, and we should be advocating for lower fees. Sitting on a spot of the Campus Fee Advisory Committee as your Vice President of Financial Affairs, I will advocate that we do not increase fees. But I will also advocate being on the Selections Committee for the Student Success Fee to make sure that more funds are used for students. Only 10% of funds in the Student Success Fees are being used for students, and the rest are being used for professors and teaching abilities. So I want to make sure that as I advocate to get people involved and to use these student success fees for the funds that we already do have to pay for, that these are being used best for the students' interests.
Thank you both for your responses. We'll go ahead and move on to the next question. A majority, if not all of your slates are in Greek organizations. How would you ensure that the voices of those outside of that community are not drowned out? We'll start with Austin again.
Yes, so I think the best approach to this is using my outside perspectives in other leadership positions and bringing them internally to Greek life. I think that it is important to use these resources to promote the positive stigmas, to promote the positive aspects like leadership and community in Greek life, but also use that to expand and make sure that it is representative of our entire campus. There's no one definition that defines SDSU. And so I think it is important to use my outside positions to not only make sure that Greek life knows that there's other people on campus, but make sure that everybody feels as a community. We want that campus vibrancy back. We want to experience SDSU together. And so I think it's really bringing this camaraderie as we move back to San Diego State to make sure that we can come together as a community.
Thank you, Austin. Abby?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes. A majority, if not all, of your slate is in a Greek organization. How would you ensure that voices outside of that community are not drowned out?
I'm actually not in Greek life, and I am that voice that is outside of that community. So, being that person that knows that firsthand experience of what it's like to have people of color not prioritized in their communities, I feel that it's very important to advocate to represent the underrepresented and really just try to be giving funds to those communities, having allocated funds just for those resource centers and just for those organizations, instead of like leaving unallocated funds for these folks, as well as being able to, advocate that we will also be able to expand and grow our organizations and our communities, and also share the stories of the lives of the students that are struggling, that don't really have much where they come from. And these degrees and these educations are just a way that of us being able to escape that and be able to get that social mobility and to be able to get that social capital and being able to move forward. So me being in this position, I would be able to speak for those students and be able to advocate for those cultural orgs and resource centers, and not rely on the student fees for them to fund them, but rely on associated students to fund them. Thank you.
May I respond?
Yeah.
Sitting on the Financial Affairs Committee for 2 years, I know exactly about these unallocated fees. And that is why I want to bring forward greater utilization of that, as well as transparency in the Associated Students budget. Sitting in Financial Affairs Committee today, I saw that about 130,000 unallocated funds is sitting in our budget right now to go directly back to the students, back to cultural organizations, back to college councils, back to any registered student organization that wants to throw an event. And so I think when it comes down to the role of Vice President of Financial Affairs and making sure that all communities is heard, it is really bringing out those unallocated funds and making sure that every student has the opportunity to finance their organizations on campus.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have sat on FAC for only 2 times, but I have noticed that there are unallocated funds now that are available to cultural organizations. However, when I reached out to some of the cultural organizations, they do not know about these funds. So reaching out to like the Hispanic Business Association and being able to tell them, hey, like we have these funds, they had no idea. So in that sense, with my connection with the cultural organizations, I could be able to let them know and reach out to them personally to let them know that we have these funds for them and that they don't really have to fundraise so hard and able to acquire their meetings and their leadership conferences and stuff like that. Thank you.
Awesome. We'll go ahead and move on to the next question.
Mental health initiative staple in associations as campus communities navigate new learning environments. How would you work to continue initiatives like this as students return to campus in the fall? We will start with Abby.
You kind of broke off a little bit. Can you repeat it one more time?
Yeah, sorry about that. Mental health initiatives have become a staple in associated students as campus communities navigate new environments. How would you work to continue these initiatives as students return to campus in the fall?
That's a great question. I feel that mental health has been one of the best ways to focus on ourselves, to be able to go through 2020 and this pandemic. One thing is being able to support and fund a program specifically that revolves around mental health. Coming from a community and a culture that doesn't really focus on mental health and the advocacy for it, I feel that it's really important to expose those cultural students to really exercise the importance of mental health and really offer those those opportunities to be able to bring that home and tell their family and parents about it. So just having a really good program to educate folks on mental health, the importance of it, and bring it back to our families and being able to share that information and apply it to ourselves. Thank you.
Austin?
Could you please repeat the question?
Sure. Mental health initiatives have become a staple in associated students as campus communities navigate new learning environments. How would you work to continue these initiatives as students return to campus in the fall?
I understand the trauma and struggles that people have been going through right now with this COVID environment and the isolation that comes with it. As your chief financial officer, I think one of the best ways I can do that is partnering with the economic crisis response team and making sure that financial stability is provided for students who may be struggling with that. Fostering a relationship that has already been created, that has already been built up very well by our both vice presidents of financial affairs previously, I think it is important to continue that relationship and make sure that these resources are properly advocated for as well as marketed to students on campus. Because at the end of the day, with mental health and with college life going on, I don't want anybody to be struggling economically.
Abby, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would also like to add that I would hope to find some sort of funding to be able to hire more psych and counselors, because I know that currently students are currently paying for it. But if we really want to advocate for student mental health, it's having more therapists and having a longer duration of, therapy, because we only get 6. But just having those, those resources that we can rely on. And just like what Austin said, for economic crisis response team, most of mental health issues and anxiety stem from financial hardships, stem from being able to not reach our meet our bills or needing our basic needs. So really just using the economic crisis response team to the best of our advantage, especially for those who are struggling, which are a lot of folks.
Awesome. Thank you for your response. We'll go ahead and move on to the next question. You kind of touched on, both of you kind of touched on this. So with all the different resource centers being implemented on campus, how do you plan as VP of Financial Affairs to continue to listen to those communities and make sure they have the funding that they need to not only continue, but also be successful? We'll start with Austin.
Yes, I think that comes from a lot of different things. I think first off, it's really working with Jessica Nair to make sure and analyze what these cultural identity centers need financial wise. Knowing their needs, it's easier to advocate them and bring those needs up in debates and bring those in conversations with administration. I also think it's really important, as I've previously mentioned, to utilize those underutilized funds in the Financial Affairs Committee. Getting those funds out to these cultural identity centers, as well as their student organizations that are associated with them, is very helpful in allowing them to promote and continue to run their organizations. I also feel another way that I can tap into this is working with the Economic Crisis Response Team. They're setting up a community cares initiative that is going to be able to help provide funding for these cultural and identity centers. And I really want to work with them in any way I can to help provide that to them.
Abby, we'll go to you.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes. With all the different resource centers being implemented on campus, how do you plan to, as VP of Financial Affairs, to continue to listen to these communities and make sure that they have the funding to not only be successful, but to thrive?
Yes, so I know that some resource centers, identity centers, cultural orgs are already demanding to be heard. They want, to be able to afford student housing and fees. They want to have allocated funds just for them. And I think just through that, revisiting those funds that we have to making sure that we have our own pile of funds for these cultural organizations for them to, take from and for them to actually know that they have them, as well as just being able to, prioritize these cultural orgs and these people of color, because, for a very long time, they've been very much so neglected at the big table, and just being able to represent those who are underrepresented, and, making their community more robust and expanding them and, making them have more resources than what SUSU just gives, as well as the university being able to follow up with these cultural organizations to continue their efforts. Thank you.
Austin, would you like to respond?
No, thank you.
Okay. I do have a point of clarification here. So every recognized student organization president and treasurer is required to attend an RSO banking training through AS. And so they're informed of funding opportunities AS provides there. Just to kind of clarify that information, I think that's important to note. So then we'll go ahead and move on to the next question.
How do you believe funds should be implemented on campus? Are there any changes that you would make to the way that the funds are being implemented on campus currently? How will you determine where money will be spent? Abby, we'll start with you.
As for funds, I believe that the money should be spent towards the students. The students should always be prioritized. If you, I'm sorry, Brenden. Can you repeat the question one more time? I'm so sorry.
He just put it in the chat, actually, if that makes it any easier.
I believe funds should prioritize student needs. I know that the cost of the degree is increasing at an alarming rate. So being able to put more funds towards scholarships to be able to help those students who are financially in need, putting more money towards the economic crisis response team to help and aid those students, as well as making sure and negotiating with President De La Torre that we are putting these finances towards the students, just like how we got aid from President Biden for the university. I would like to know where that money goes to, whether it's majority to the faculty staff or whether it's majority to the students. Just being able to have financial transparency of students being able to know where is this money going, and also to have the final say in where the money goes, whether it's RSOs, whether it's scholarships, whether it's campus life, just stuff like that. And it's just really important that we get the final say and we get to determine where that money goes as students collectively. Thank you.
Austin?
Yes, as I mentioned, in the role of Vice President of Financial Affairs, I want to take on a role that intentionally serves students' needs. And so by seeking out community members of different communities and having meaningful conversations with students, I want to make sure that funding is implemented in ways that serve them. I know that sometimes it can be surprising to see financial increase, like campus fees increasing and such like that. And so I think it really is using my platform as an AS exec to advocate against bringing about fees and exhausting all the resources before that, such as donations, funding, as well as subsidies. And so I think really making sure that on top of making sure that fees are not being increased, it's also very important to utilize these funds in a way that serves students.
Abby, would you like to respond?
No, thank you.
Okay, we'll move on then.
So next question, short and sweet. How do you plan to make yourself accessible to students? And we'll start with Austin.
I plan to make myself accessible to students by working with them at the ground level. I want to meet with people and talk about how the Financial Affairs Committee's budget can be allocated to these organizations. As my slate name is SDSU Now, Immediate Advocacy, I want to take the immediate advocacy part and advocate for students to use these finances in the best way possible.
Abby?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes. How do you plan to make yourself accessible to students?
I feel that I already am accessible to students, but to push more and reach out to those organizations, cultural organizations, double checking that they are actually seeing that they have these funds available to them. And like you said, there's the AS banking training that everyone goes to, but not everyone attends. So being able to double check with those organizations and making sure that they are attending and making sure that they know that they have these funds available. And I'm accessible to anyone who has questions, and just making sure that, that these folks know that they have these funds. Thank you.
Awesome. Austin, would you like to respond?
No, thank you.
Okay. So
All right, next question. If elected, what do you plan to be your top 3 priorities during your service? Oh, sorry. We'll start with Abby.
Thank you for that question. My top priority would be first to find a location for a permanent and full-time AS food pantry. I know that the food pantries only open 3 times a week, and as food insecurities are increasing, students are starting to rely on this source. So it can be very inconvenient for them to have to wait every other day. So finding a location where it's permanent, I've been working with Dr. Dooley to be able to either put that permanent, food pantry in the Wellness Hub, as well as rebranding it to an AS food pantry to a permanent food market, hopefully creating more jobs for students. Secondly, I would like to create a program where students can take their leftover unused dining dollars and put them towards the ECRT at the end of the year when they have all this meal plan money left. And third, I would like to continue to advocate to decrease student fees, as well as, making sure that these category 4 fees that are approved by De La Torre and not by the student body, that the student body's voices are made sure to be heard by President De La Torre, and that we will be able to have the final say in whether these get implemented or not.
Austin.
As your Chief Financial Officer, I will establish transparency in the Associated Students budget. I will work with the Economic Crisis Response Team to create greater accessibility to student resources, and I will provide underrepresented populations with additional opportunities to access underutilized student funding. For my first point, I want to establish transparency in the Associated Students budget. And how I feel I can best do that is by creating better marketing for the Associated Students budget. Making sure that students know how much money is left and how they can get these finances are essential to the student body utilizing these fundings. I also want to work with the Economic Crisis Response Team and continue to develop that relationship that both Dustin Adkins and Victor Panera have continued to develop. And through that, we are able to spread student resources to more communities on campus. I also want to provide and allow underrepresented populations to utilize this extra funding that is often underutilized. As I've mentioned, sitting on the Financial Affairs Committee, we see a lot of dollars underutilized. And so I really want to seek out these organizations and make them accessible to these underrepresented populations so that they have money in their pockets.
Abby, would you like to respond?
No, thank you.
All right.
okay, awesome. So people from the audience actually brought up some good questions I think would be cool for you guys to answer. So you both talked about decreasing student fees and making the process more transparent. But I think the 2 fees we approved last year, one would support the resource centers and the other would support mental health. So how would you kind of balance this decreasing fees, but also making sure that these initiatives and these resources remain funded? We'll start with Austin.
I think it's important to recognize that fees that are already passed, we should be utilizing those funds to the best of our ability. We can't change what has already been passed, but I want to make sure that these funds are used properly and used now for the student body. I also think moving forward, as I've mentioned previously, it's very important to exhaust all options before resorting back to fees. And I think that's the best way we can continue to encourage administration to not increase fees. By utilizing subsidies, by utilizing donations. All of these ways are much better ways to raise money for campus, but are not affecting the students in a negative light.
Abby?
Thank you. I think that one way we could mitigate these fees is working with the VP External to advocate for more funding, more on a state legislator level, lobbying for more money for these resources instead of solely relying on students to be able to pay for these resources. So just making sure that we work with our VP External Relations and being able to try to maybe even use our alumni network to be able to get more funds in that way, and being able to just exhaust any other source of income, or sorry, not income, any source of funding that we have on campus. Thank you.
Austin, would you want to respond?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we have a few more chat questions, so we'll take a few of those. From Charlie, we have, what have you done in the past to advocate for these underrepresented communities that you aim to help? We'll start with Abby.
Thank you for that question, Charlie. I'm currently serving as the director of fundraising for Tijuana Home Build, a community, a family that actually is in need of a home because they live in poor conditions right now. So just being able to fundraise that amount of money and trying to taking that money and helping another community across borders to be able to live a comfortable life and have their basic needs met, as well as the economic crisis response team, a lot of students there that go there are low income students or first generation, and they very much so use the economic crisis response team. So I've been an ECRT advocate for about 2 years now, and my first year as Student Support Commission, I was really trying to find a way where students can donate their money to ECRT using their meal plan money. Thank you.
Austin, we'll go to you.
Could you please repeat the question?
Sure, it came from Charlie in the chat. What have you done in the past to advocate for these underrepresented communities you aim to help?
One thing that I've done in the past to help these underrepresented communities that I aim to help, that pertains particularly to the role of Vice President of Financial Affairs, is I have sat on the budget presentations of cultural organizations each year, these last 2 years. Being a member of the Financial Affairs Committee, we establish budgets of funds to make sure that these cultural organizations have the budget that they want to start off the year. Now, I'm not saying that that's enough. I'm saying that we should continue to advocate for more utilizations of the funding, as there surely is a surplus with around 130,000 in Financial Affairs Committee. But I also want to emphasize that I have done that, and I'm continuing to do that this election season, actually, by sitting on these cultural presentations and making sure that they have the budget they want for this upcoming year.
Abby, would you like to respond?
No, thank you.
I think it's a really important conversation to have about fees, but I do want to quickly address the Aztec Rocks Hunger campaign, because that is kind of the cornerstone of the VP of Financial Affairs position. So obviously this year was very different for Aztec Rock Hunger. So looking forward to next year, what are some things you two would do to kind of step up the campaign and make it just as successful? We'll start with Austin.
Volunteering for both previous Aztec Rock Hunger campaigns, the one ran by Dustin Adkins in person and the one ran by Victor Panera virtually, I think we can combine the best of both worlds for these Aztec Rock Hungers. Using the physical plan for Aztec Rock Hunger that Dustin Adkins really utilized 2 years ago is very important, but I also think bringing in virtual aspects moving forward is going to help push us to a bigger and better Aztec Rock Hunger campaign than ever. We were able to reach people across the nation this year through virtual means, and we were also able to entice and encourage more Aztec alumni to donate to Aztec Rock Hunger. And so I therefore think that utilizing both the virtual and physical presence of the Aztec Rock Hunger campaign, we can create an Aztec Rock Hunger campaign that doesn't just last 3 weeks, but is something that expands to the entire year, because food insecurity isn't a 3-week issue. It's a year-long issue that people face.
Abby?
Yes. As for Aztec Rocks Hunger, I know that this year the campaign had struggled with being virtual, but I know that when we go back into campus that we can have a hybrid model. We could do virtual fundraising and we could do in-person fundraising, partnering with local businesses to be able to fundraise through them around the San Diego community. as well as be able to continue with the 5K virtual marathon that turned out to be very successful with people across the country to be able to participate as well. As well as getting back to that 600,000 goal. And I know that we hit 400,000, but I think that 600,000 is the required amount that, you know, students or people of the Jacob and Cushmans need, and that's how many people that they serve. So being able to get back to that 600,000 pounds of food, and also that is money that is food that goes into our AS food pantry. So it is very vital that we make sure that our ARH this year becomes very successful, because we are feeding our students as well as the San Diego community. Thank you.
I'd love to elaborate.
Yeah, go for it.
The Aztecs Rock Hunger campaign is not about the number. It's about spreading awareness to food insecurity. Food insecurity is a serious issue. And so no matter the number that we raise, although it does help people, and I think that I want to and I know I want to advocate to raise the most amount of money possible for the organization, it's important to note that we shouldn't be focused on the number and that we should be focused on the mission of the thing. I also believe that, elaborating on my last point, making it a year-long thing, on top of advocating and making sure that people know about how to combat food insecurity, I would love to work with the Economic Crisis Response Team to continue the Aztec Swipe Out Hunger Initiative. This initiative allows students throughout the year after the campaign is passed to pass money that they have in their remaining balances of their food plans to the cause and to the initiative.
Awesome, thank you. We'll move on to our last question, so we have enough time for candidates to give their closing statements.
All right, our last question. What are your thoughts on AS fees? AS fees are increasing next year for students. What will you do to mitigate the impact on low-income students and all students? We'll start with Abby.
One thing that I will do is I will try to exhaust all sources of funds that AS has. I know that low-income students struggle with, you know, having these extra increase of fees and having to struggle to be able to financially meet their needs, as well as paying for the tuition. So with that being said, I will advocate for these students and look at the budget and revisit and just find different ways that we can allocate this money and be able to use outside sources like working with the VB External to be able to find ways to cover these increase of fees. And yeah, thank you.
Austin?
On top of advocating for students and making sure that there is accessible opportunities to help mitigate these fees, one tangible thing that I want to do is work with my president, Ashley Tejada, to make sure that we can utilize every ounce of funding for associate students that we can make to help create scholarships for students to help mitigate these fees and make sure that students who can't pay for these fees have an opportunity through associate students that has these fees increasing to help them not have to pay for it.
Abby, did you want to respond?
No, thank you.
All right.
So we'll go ahead and start with closing statements. Austin, would you want to start it off?
Sure thing. Thank you again to the Daily Aztec for providing us this opportunity to speak. I'd also like to thank the students who are hearing us out right now and hearing what we have to say about this position. I'd also like to again thank my opponent, Abigail Tamayo, for a great debate. I hope I have shown to you today through this debate that I have the relevant experience, knowledge, and passion for this position to create immediate change and create intentional change. I want to bring immediate advocacy in the role through our finances and philanthropic efforts, but I also want to create lasting impact. And one of the best ways I think that we can create lasting impact is by making sure that equity-minded issues are not a 3-week event, are not only a month, but I want to make sure that equity-minded issues such as food insecurity are being aware and being combated throughout the entire year. I have developed a servant mindset, and I want to continue to implement that through the program. As Vice President of Financial Affairs, whatever I accomplish in that role, it doesn't matter if I don't change the world, as long as I change somebody's world here at SDSU. Vote Austin Barber for Vice President of Financial Affairs and vote the SDSU Now slate on the SDSU web portal from March 22nd to March 25th. Thank you for listening, y'all, today.
Thank you, Austin. Abby?
I just want to thank you all for being here today. I want to thank the chat for being able to ask questions that we have not heard of before, or that we will keep in our mind as we continue to be in the VP of Finance role. And I just want to thank everyone for, addressing those issues, because those are issues that need to be heard and that we can take and, implement them. I just want to be able to reassure you all that I am trying to, bridge those financial equity gaps and making sure that the university is accessible and affordable for everyone. And I just want to make sure that, students will feel supported and the underrepresented will be represented at the big table. And that as students, as we work collectively together, that we will continue to advocate and that we get the final say in our funds. Thank you.
Awesome. Once again, thank you guys for coming on and tuning in. We do really appreciate it here at the Daily Aztec to have the opportunity to inform students. Just a heads up to everyone here, our next debate is at 5:30. No, it's not at 5:30. I forget. Sorry.
At 6:30.
6:30. And the link is in our Instagram bio and as well on the AS Election website under the events page. We really appreciate the questions from the chat, and hopefully you all tune in. So thank you and see you all later.